Hello, it's Blue Orange 22. Sorry for the setup and the bad quality. I'm getting some new equipment and changing some stuff around. I want to do a video on Sarah Everard, and I wasn't going to when the story first came out because I kind of don't like how tragic stories can become so political. But the reality is, stories are political, and it doesn't matter to talk about them in that way. This is not going to be my full breakdown on this because there's a lot of stuff to unpack, but I kind of see the feminist response to this as an example of female entitlement and female privilege that feminists often show. And the reason being, why is this murder special? Like, it was a tragic death, but 70% of murders in the UK are men. 70% of victims are men. The majority of victims are men. So why is this one murder representative of a special concern? Not that violence against women isn't a concern, but why does it get placed above the concern of violence against men, who are the majority of murder victims? And I often hear feminists say, oh, well, that's an example of what about the men, or making women's issues about men, or trying to derail a woman's issue. But I don't think that argument works, because what you're doing is you're trying to present the examples of violence against women as a special concern in the UK, when in fact, violence against women in the UK is less common. Women are less likely to be murdered. And of course that matters. Every murder victim matters. But you can't say, well, 30% of victims are the special victims who deserve more focus, and then have a vigil during COVID and possibly spread COVID, and then say, well, the COVID rules shouldn't count for this because it's a special concern, it's a special case. Why do you get to decide that women's lives are special lives and murdering a woman is like a special murder that deserves an entire movement? Because men are murdered all the time. I put some stats down below, and I'm going to do videos and kind of break this down more as time goes on. But the vast majority of murders in the UK happen to males. So why do you say that female victims of murder is the special concern? And that's what I don't like. And that's where a lot of men come from when we say, well, what about the men? Because we hear feminists talking about an issue in a completely one-sided way. And then we hear feminists say, well, violence against women in the UK is an extra special crisis and an extra special issue. Like, we should focus especially on that. But wait a minute, why would you only focus on the 30% of victims? I'm not saying you should ignore them, but feminists are kind of phrasing it in such a way that almost makes it sound like the lives of men don't matter as much. Like, murdering men isn't as serious because, well, it's only happening to men. And that's where a lot of guys are coming from when they say things like, well, what about the men, when talking about something like the Sarah Everard case, which of course is a tragic case. And just to be clear, just so no one tries to twist this in any kind of way, I'm not saying we should ignore violence against women. I'm saying you shouldn't have violence against one gender being considered more important or worse than another gender. So I put those links down below. You can see some of the stats. I'm seeing a lot of very toxic, very negative, almost frightening language coming out of this story. A lot of people being very angry at men. All these articles saying, well, you know, even if you're not personally responsible for this, as a man, it's still your responsibility because you're part of the toxic male culture. Wait a minute, does that only go one way here? Because what about the culture where we're the primary victims, and you have feminists in the UK trying to legalize domestic violence against men, or trying to close women's prisons, even when women murder men? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I put 2 links to videos I did on those 2 things down below. And that actually happened. Feminist groups in the UK, recently, this is all within the last 2-3 years, tried to, first of all, close down all women's prisons and make it the law so that women don't go to jail for almost any crime, even violent crimes. Recently, in 2020, feminists tried to campaign to have the domestic abuse bill, which was the national law on which is the national law on domestic violence, rewritten to be gendered in such a way that basically domestic violence against men isn't considered a crime because the bill is gendered and only recognizes violence against women. What irritates me is the same feminists who try to do that are the ones who are tweeting things like "not all men" and going to vigils without masks on and having this angry attitude blaming all men. It's just very hypocritical, and it's very scary because what happens when you start teaching a population that this group of the population is inherently bad and dangerous and scary? That's when things can get very troubling.